Have you ever wondered why some people can sit quietly in a noisy room and yet all eyes naturally turn toward them? It's not because they speak often. It's not because they try to appear important. It's certainly not because they seek attention. It's simply because they are different. They control something most people never learn to control themselves. We grow up in a world that teaches us to survive. You must speak up, act fast, and respond immediately to every situation. From the time we are children, whenever we are misunderstood, we rush to explain. When criticized, we scramble to defend ourselves. In relationships, an unanswered message makes us restless. At work, a moment of silence from a superior triggers our anxiety, convincing us that we've made a mistake. And so for years, we are unconsciously trained to believe that quick reaction is strength, that silence equals weakness. But no one tells you this. Every time you react, you slowly hand others the map to your own psychology. You think your quick response shows intelligence, but in reality, you are exposing your limits, revealing where your emotional boundaries lie, where your unhealed fears reside, where your inner shadow can be easily exploited. Carl Jung warned long ago, most of what governs our lives does not come from the external world, but from the unconscious within us that we haven't had the courage to confront. And this lack of self-control turns you into prey on chessboards you never even realized you were playing. The world believes that power lies in speaking, but the harsher truth is this: supreme power lies in deliberate silence, in the ability to stay outside the games others try to pull you into, in controlling the rhythm of the game without uttering a single word. Have you ever wondered why some people can simply sit there, say nothing, and yet the entire room gravitates toward them? It's not because they try to stand out. It's not because they seek attention. It's not because they attempt to control everyone around them. They simply sit, observe, and still command the entire rhythm of the room. You were taught wrong from the beginning. The modern world convinced you that power comes from speaking quickly, debating skillfully, reacting instantly to every attack. As a child, when you were misunderstood, you learned to defend yourself. When criticized, you learned to justify. When others grew silent, you filled the void with endless explanations. And every time you did, you unknowingly handed control over to the person in front of you. You send a message to someone you care about, waiting for a reply. You see the word seen, but no response. Your chest tightens and your mind spirals into worst-case scenarios. You deliver a polished presentation to your boss. They simply look at you, silent, offering neither praise nor criticism. Suddenly, you feel lost. In arguments, a light provocation triggers an instant reaction from you. You think you're defending yourself. In reality, you're exposing your deepest vulnerabilities. Every emotional reaction is a map revealing the shadow. Carl Jung warned about the fears, insecurities, and wounds you've long tried to bury, now floating to the surface through a few careless words. You believe you're controlling the game. The truth is, you're handing your opponent the keys to control you. The moment they discover what triggers you most, they can lead you anywhere they wish. That's not power. That's unconscious slavery to unintegrated impulses. Steve Jobs didn't need many words. Every time he appeared, the world held its breath. Miyamoto Musashi never drew his sword first. He let his opponents destroy themselves in desperate waiting. Socrates didn't argue fiercely. He simply asked questions that exposed others' internal contradictions. They expect noise. You give them nothing. That's power. They expect you to react. You stay silent. That's power. They expect you to defend yourself. You simply observe. That's power. They wait for your emotions to surface. You remain calm. That's power. Every time you resist the urge to speak, you forge another layer of invisible armor. The external world cannot control you if your internal world no longer reacts. Silence is not fear. Silence is not passivity. Silence is an unspoken declaration: I don't need to play this game to control the board I've already claimed. Every time you react, you surrender a piece of your control to someone else. You believe you're defending yourself, that you're winning, but in reality, you're exposing the raw blueprint of your own psychology. In an argument, the other person only needs to throw a simple attack. You're never good enough. Immediately, your chest tightens, your voice rises, your words pour out, frantically desperate to protect your self-worth. But in that very moment, you've revealed that your confidence is fragile, that you're terrified of being judged, that a part of you never truly believed you were enough. They only had to strike that one nerve, and you walked yourself into defense. They insult. You defend. They control. That is the game most people stay trapped in their entire lives. You text someone you love. No reply. The longer you wait, the louder your mind spirals. Are they mad? Did I do something wrong? Are they ignoring me? Your own mind tortures you with scenarios born from your inability to control your internal state, while the other person simply uses silence as a rope, pulling you further out of balance. Steve Jobs wielded silence like a slow-burning bomb, on stage each second of pause, forcing the entire audience to hold its breath, hanging on every word yet to come. Miyamoto Musashi arrived late to his duels, letting his opponents waste their energy in anxious waiting, destroying themselves before swords were ever drawn. Socrates simply smiled as others grew angry, because he understood when someone loses control, they expose their most vulnerable front. They want your reaction. You give them stillness. That's mastery. They wait for your response. You remain silent. That's mastery. They hope for your anger. You simply observe. That's control. They try to push you off balance. You stand like stone. That's strength. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so it is. The less aware you are of your own weaknesses, the more easily others can activate them. But the one who has faced his shadow, who has confronted his wounds, his fear of failure, his terror of abandonment, has dismantled every weapon the world could ever use against him. Their silence is not from a lack of arguments. It's because they understand every unnecessary word is a vulnerability. Every time you maintain your composure under attack, you force your opponent to reveal even more. This is no longer defense. This is invisible offense. Silence becomes a mirror where your opponent is left alone to face their own insecurities reflected in the void of unanswered space. The most dangerous moment in any confrontation isn't found in what you say, but in what you reveal when you can no longer endure silence. Modern humans live in an age saturated with signals. Everything around you pressures you to respond instantly. An unanswered email makes you anxious. A message marked "seen without a reply" burns through your imagination. A glance from your boss during a meeting without a single comment sends your mind spiraling. Behind all of this isn't the event itself, it's your fear of the unknown, of the space you can't control. And it's within that space that real power is born. Think back to a recent argument. The other person hurls a simple attack. "You'll never be good enough." Instantly, your blood surges, your heart races, and your brain fires in a defensive reflex. You respond immediately, desperate to prove yourself right. But in that very act, you hand control of the game to your opponent. They now see exactly where your weakness lies. They see what breaks your composure. Every justification is a disguised confession. Every reaction is a revelation. Every word is a window into your fear. Steve Jobs never rushed to fill silence. When unveiling products on stage, he left long pauses between words. The room held its breath, hanging on his next sentence, as though awaiting a decree. That was no accident. That was rhythm control. That was calculated tension. They expect constant noise, he gives them pause. That's power. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary Japanese samurai, mastered the art of waiting with ruthless precision. He often arrived hours late to duels, forcing his opponents to wait under the scorching sun, draining both their energy and focus. By the time swords were finally drawn, his enemy had already lost, not on the battlefield, but in their own mind. They prepare for attack. He prepares for exhaustion. That's dominance. Socrates never shouted at his opponents. Instead, he asked seemingly harmless questions, guiding his challengers into the labyrinth of their own contradictions, until they realized they had defeated themselves. Socrates understood the paradox: the more they speak, the more they expose. The more you ask, the more they crumble. Silence isn't avoidance. Silence is a formless strike. Silence is a mirror reflecting the weakest parts of your opponent's mind. When you refuse to react, they are forced to fill the space, revealing more, exposing deeper insecurities, digging into their own blind spots. They search for stability. You offer uncertainty. That's control. Carl Jung once warned, "Man is not afraid of the dark. He fears what he imagines inside it." And when you create that silence inside your opponent's mind, you're handing them a mirror reflecting their own unconscious. They're forced to confront insecurities they've never mastered. Your silence amplifies the echoes of their own fears, a place where control collapsed long ago. In professional interrogations, what terrifies suspects most is not a barrage of questions, but the interrogator who sits quietly, stares into their eyes, and allows the silent tension to erode their defenses until confessions pour out unprovoked. You don't need to draw your sword. You simply allow your opponent to wield their own emotional blade against themselves. That's the essence of silent dominance. In a world saturated by constant presence, where everyone tries to show up more, speak more, post more, strategic absence becomes one of the rarest and most powerful forms of control, one that few have the courage to embrace. We live in an era where absence makes people uncomfortable. You don't reply to a message for a few hours, and they start wondering what's wrong. You skip an event and people start talking. You pause your social media and countless assumptions fill the vacuum. And right within that ambiguity, power quietly begins to emerge. Because what people truly desire isn't what's always available, but what's elusive. What's easily accessible becomes ordinary in the mind. What's rare is magnified by imagination. Carl Jung once said, "What is absent in reality occupies an obsessive place in the psyche." Unreadable. This is why the one who controls their own appearance also controls how much others desire them. Look at how Steve Jobs controlled the attention of the world. He didn't launch products every month. He didn't flood the public with constant updates. He made the world wait, speculate, anticipate what might be quietly brewing behind the curtain, and when he appeared, every eye locked onto him. They expect constant updates. He delivers rare events. That's gravity. The samurai legend Miyamoto Musashi used disappearance to break his opponents psychologically. He deliberately arrived hours late to duels not out of carelessness, but because he understood with every passing minute, his opponents would drain themselves mentally in the waiting, consumed by their own anxiety. By the time the battle truly began, his enemy had already lost, not due to inferior swordsmanship, but because their mental strength had been eroded by the emptiness Musashi created. They prepare for battle. He prepares for collapse. That's timing. In personal relationships, the more you initiate, the faster you reply. The more you accommodate, the more your perceived value quietly erodes. Not because you're less attractive, but because you've removed the very element that creates desire, scarcity. They expect your attention. You give them space. That's scarcity. The art of intentional disappearance isn't childish game playing or arrogance. It is the highest form of inner mastery. The one who dares to withdraw at the right moment is the one no longer enslaved by the fear of being forgotten. He is not driven by the need to always be seen to feel valued, and that calm detachment makes him untouchable. While most are guided by the fear of abandonment, the one who steps outside that current becomes the still center that everything else orbits. In negotiation, the one who steps back after making an offer applies invisible pressure on the other side. When you don't rush to fill the silence with pleading or concessions, your opponent negotiates with themselves, slowly eroding their position to draw you back to the table. They push for urgency. You wait in silence. That's leverage. In leadership, the one who only speaks at decisive moments commands deeper respect than the one who speaks constantly. Each rare word becomes like a decree because those who listen know when they finally speak, it's no longer opinion, it's direction. At its deepest level, controlling your presence is pure psychological mastery. You don't need to compete. You don't need to chase attention. Deliberate rarity forces the world to seek you. Silence creates curiosity, but strategic disappearance creates legend. In today's world, people are programmed to worship speed. Reply to messages instantly. Respond to emails immediately. Seize the upper hand in every debate. Close deals quickly so you don't miss the opportunity. But what they fail to see is this. Their urgency makes them the easiest prey in any psychological game. The one who cannot tolerate delay is the one most easily manipulated. Carl Jung once said, "What you fail to master within will become the force that controls you from without." At its deepest level, your greatest enemy isn't others, it's your own impatience. Think back to the times you anxiously awaited a response after a job interview. Every passing hour felt like mental torture. You kept refreshing your inbox, unable to endure the silence. In negotiation, you make an offer and the other side goes silent. Suddenly, your mind spins. Was I too aggressive? Are they considering someone else? Should I lower my price to keep them interested? Your own mind becomes a self-destruct mechanism because you cannot sit with uncertainty. But every second you wait, you bleed leverage. Steve Jobs understood that products don't need to launch every month. He let time work for him. Every time Apple announced a new event, the world held its breath. Jobs turned patience into a psychological clock that controlled the entire tech market. They crave updates. He gives scarcity. That's control. Miyamoto Musashi stretched the battle long before swords were drawn. He knew that every minute his opponent waited, they were draining their mental stability. By the time his sword finally moved, his enemies had lost long ago, not on the ground, but in their own minds. They prepare for speed. He prepares for exhaustion. That's psychological warfare. In relationships, the more you rush to clarify everything, the more you push for quick answers, the more you lower your own perceived value. Patience allows you to maintain power. When you can wait, you are no longer driven by fear of being left behind. They demand closure. You wait in silence. That's emotional leverage. Patience isn't passivity. It is one of the most sophisticated forms of power. When you control the pace, you control the emotional heartbeat of everyone around you. The more they rush, the more they lose control. The slower you move, the more stable you become. In business, the impatient always overpay for certainty. In debates, the impatient always speak out of turn. In negotiations, the impatient always concede too soon. They chase outcomes. You control timing. That's dominance. Jung said, "Patience is the strength of those who have confronted and integrated their inner darkness." The patient are not afraid of missing out because they understand that real opportunity belongs to those who can regulate the pace of the game. While the masses obsess over short-term gains, the one who can delay gratification always wins the endgame. Patience is control over time, the very element every manipulative strategy tries to exploit, but very few dare to master. Look at the true masters of success. Warren Buffett didn't build his wealth through rapid decisions. He became rich because he understood that patience multiplies power over time. Elon Musk doesn't release every new technology the moment it's conceived. He waits perfects, and when he moves, it's strong enough to reshape entire industries. They fear waiting. You master waiting. That's untouchable. In every game of power, the true danger never lies in what you say, but in what you reveal when you can no longer endure silence. But at an even deeper level, power doesn't simply come from silence, it comes from the ability to not react. Non-reaction is the true core of control. Because every time you react, you hand your opponent the map to your emotions, your fears, and your weaknesses. Carl Jung called this unconscious surrender, when your unintegrated shadow suddenly takes over your behavior before you even realize it. And in that instant, true power is lost. You see this play out in the smallest situations. A coworker casually mocks, "You're always missing deadlines." If you instantly reply, "That's not true. Last time it was because," you have unconsciously admitted that punctuality is a hidden insecurity you've been desperately trying to cover. They no longer need to attack. You've already exposed your weakness. They provoke you. You react. They control. Watch any debate on social media. Someone gets criticized, they panic, frantically defending themselves, writing long posts fighting back against every comment. They believe they're winning with logic. In reality, they're exposing their fear of being misunderstood. The one who does not react sits outside the entire battle. They attack your ego. You refuse the bait. That's sovereignty. Steve Jobs understood this better than anyone. In important meetings, when employees rushed to defend their ideas, he would simply stare, saying nothing. His silence applied invisible pressure, forcing them to adjust their arguments, filling the space with increasingly desperate justifications. Miyamoto Musashi applied the same principle in sword duels. He allowed his opponent's anxiety to grow, provoking them into attacking first in haste before calmly delivering the finishing strike. Socrates made it even simpler. He didn't argue, he simply asked soft questions, each one a philosophical trap, drawing opponents into revealing their own contradictions. They reveal themselves. You stay still. That's control. Non-reaction isn't passivity. It's a conscious decision to stand outside the emotional chaos others create. It's the skill of keeping your heartbeat steady while others lose theirs. It's the art of refusing to play by anyone else's rules. In negotiation, the side that rushes to justify its own offer first is always weaker. In relationships, the one who needs to talk things out immediately is the one being emotionally manipulated. In leadership, the one who must speak right away is usually the one with the least internal stability. They seek your emotions, you deny them access. That's absolute power. Jung once said, self-control begins with the ability to observe your emotions before they shape your actions. The one who sits still in the storm holds the rhythm of both time and the psychology of everyone still struggling to swim. Imagine being publicly insulted in front of a crowd. Most people would immediately respond to defend their honor. But when you simply stare at your accuser, silent and unmoved, it's they who spiral into panic. Why isn't he responding, did I go too far? Am I losing control? Every second you hold that silence, you're not only controlling yourself, you're draining their mental energy. They throw chaos. You absorb it. That's psychological warfare. And with enough practice, you discover a truth. The faster one needs to react, the easier they are to control. The more one delays reaction, the closer they move toward being untouchable. At its deepest level, non-reaction stops being a strategy and becomes pure inner freedom. Freedom from external triggers. Freedom from the fear of being misunderstood. Freedom from the endless debates where most remain trapped for life. That's the final stage of power. Most people spend their lives trapped in games they never even question whether they need to play the game of arguing, the game of convincing, the game of being right, the game of emotional victories. They are obsessed with proving themselves in every situation, desperate for recognition to validate their self-worth. But at the highest level of psychological power, you realize one cold truth. The one who doesn't need to win is the one who cannot be defeated. Because when you no longer play, you control the board. Observe any argument, one side attacks, the other counters back and forth endlessly. Both believe that whoever proves themselves right will win. But in reality, the one who holds power is the one who stands outside the conflict, the one who no longer needs to prove anything, who allows others to hold their opinions without needing to correct them. They argue for approval. You watch in silence. That's mastery. Carl Jung pointed out that the urge to prove oneself is rooted in unidentified insecurities within the unconscious. The more someone needs to prove themselves, the more unresolved darkness lives inside them. Every time you feel triggered to explain yourself, you're exposing your most vulnerable side for others to easily exploit. Steve Jobs in public interviews rarely fell into long debates. When faced with harsh questions, he often just smiled or simply replied, "I understand that perspective," and then he stopped. His refusal to engage disarmed his opponent, leaving them off balance, unable to pull him into the emotional game they desired. Miyamoto Musashi applied the same principle on the battlefield. He never rushed into his opponent's tempo. He observed, waited, allowing his enemies to exhaust themselves in their desperation to seize early victory. Socrates, the master of calm, never needed to declare himself right. He asked questions, gently leading opponents into their own contradictions until they exposed themselves. They need to win. You don't play. That's ultimate power. Exiting the game is not weak retreat. It's removing yourself from the emotional trap your opponent sets. When you're no longer tied to being understood, being right, or winning the argument, no one can manipulate you psychologically. In relationships, the person who always needs to resolve everything immediately is emotionally controlled. The one who can sit in the unresolved space holding steady becomes untouchable. They crave resolution. You embrace the unknown. That's control. In negotiation, the side that constantly defends their offer is revealing their negotiation weakness. The one who states their terms and then sits silently without justification or need to please exerts the greatest pressure on the other party. Every defense is a confession. Every silence is control. Jung once said, "True freedom is not in controlling the world, but in mastering the impulses within yourself." When you no longer crave to win, you begin to see what others are trapped inside. They struggle for validation. They fight to feel right. They react to feel worthy. While you, having transcended that fear, sit still controlling the board without ever moving a piece. That's when you win, not by defeating others, but by refusing to be trapped. In nature, whatever is rare always becomes the most desired, not because it is better by nature, but because its very elusiveness inflates its value inside the human mind. Psychology operates the same way. The more accessible you are, the more you're taken for granted. The rarer your presence, the more you become the center of imagination and longing. And at the deepest level of control, this is the art of invisibility. When you master intentional absence, you don't fade, you become obsession. Carl Jung once said, "What is missing in consciousness becomes an obsession in the unconscious." When you control your own presence, you control the mental space others dedicate to you. They can't grasp you. They're forced to fill the void with imagination, and imagination always builds versions far more valuable than reality. They expect your presence. You offer absence. That's magnetism. Look at how Steve Jobs mastered this. He didn't constantly appear in public. He didn't parade on social media every week. Instead, he let his absence create anticipation. Every time Apple announced an event the world stopped to watch, his rarity turned every appearance into something heavier than his words themselves. They expect noise. He delivers silence. That's gravity. Miyamoto Musashi understood this art just as deeply. Before every duel, he would intentionally arrive hours late. His opponents waited under the sun, growing anxious, dismantling their own composure. By the time battle began, they had already lost long before swords clashed inside their own minds. They seek confrontation. He controls timing. That's psychological warfare. In personal relationships, you see the same principle everywhere. The one who always texts first, who initiates every meeting, who is always available, believes they're building strong connections. But in truth, they quietly lower their value in the other person's perception. Ease breeds familiarity. Meanwhile, the one who knows when to pull back, who appears only when necessary, creates gaps filled with curiosity, becoming the center of desire. They expect constant access. You create distance. That's desire. In negotiation, the one who knows when to remain silent and when to withdraw temporarily is the one who controls the other side's psychology. When you're unafraid to lose the deal, when you can suspend talks without panic, you force your counterpart to negotiate against themselves while waiting for your return. Every pause amplifies pressure. Every retreat builds demand. At the highest level, invisibility isn't just temporary withdrawal. It's the art of regulating your own cycle of appearances as a weapon for controlling others' emotions. They don't know when you'll show up. They can't predict your rhythm. They're trapped inside the hunger for control you created with intentional disappearance. They desire certainty. You deliver unpredictability. That's domination, Jung reminded us. What people fear most is not loss, but not knowing what they've lost. When you withdraw with precision, you trap your opponent inside that ambiguity. They begin to imagine inventing stories about you, and that very imagination makes you more captivating than any version of reality. At its deepest level, disappearing isn't about praise, it's about controlling attention. Because attention operates by the law of scarcity. The less you appear, the higher your value. They chase your presence. You master invisibility. That's pure psychological power. At the highest peak of psychological power, you no longer seek control over others. You no longer crave victory in every confrontation. You no longer hunger for recognition and praise or submission. At this level, true power isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself to the point where no one can manipulate you anymore. Carl Jung called this the final integration, the union of the conscious ego and the unconscious shadow, where you're no longer ruled by unrecognized impulses within. Every power game operates on the same principle. The more predictable you are, the more controllable you become. The one who reveals more desires, more reacts emotionally, becomes the perfect prey for sophisticated manipulation. Conversely, the one who remains composed, who refuses to react as others expect, instantly renders every manipulation strategy useless. Look at Steve Jobs. He didn't need to attend every press event nor insert himself into every controversy. His silence, distance, and strategic appearances created a psychological gravity that made the entire tech world orbit around him. They waited for him. They studied his every word because they couldn't control when he would appear. They expect access. He controls presence. That's gravitational leadership. Miyamoto Musashi knew the battle was never in the first sword strike, but in the collapse of his enemy's mind long before any fight began. He controlled the pacing, extended the waiting, planted countless psychological scenarios into his opponent's minds until they defeated themselves before blades ever crossed. They prepare for fight. He prepares their collapse. That's psychological warfare. Socrates understood that argument doesn't create truth. He didn't impose, he simply asked. He observed, letting his opponents sink into their own logical contradictions. He controlled without controlling. They defend their ego. He dismantles it with questions. That's surgical dominance. In negotiation, the one who remains calm under time pressure forces the other side into self-compromise. When you can walk away from a deal without fear, your opponent will instinctively adjust to pull you back. Every pause shifts leverage. Every silence shifts power. In personal relationships, this law operates with brutal precision. The one who always needs reassurance, who constantly asks, "Where do we stand?" who demands emotional clarity, surrenders all control. The one who can sit in uncertainty without immediate answers holds the pulse of the entire relationship. They chase clarity. You embrace ambiguity. That's emotional sovereignty. Jung reminds us, no one can control you once you've integrated your unconscious parts, because most external power only exists when there's something inside to latch onto. When you are no longer ruled by the fear of abandonment, no one can threaten you with silence. When you no longer fear losing value, no one can push you into defense. When you no longer fear being misunderstood, no one can force you to justify yourself. They trigger emotions. You remain sovereign. That's unbreakable power. At the deepest level, power is no longer about how you control others. It's when every external tactic becomes meaningless in the face of your internal stability. And as you sit still at the eye of the storm, the entire world revolves around you but can no longer move you. If there is one lesson you must carry from this entire journey of thought, it is this: supreme power in life does not come from convincing others to believe in you. It comes from no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. In the modern world, where people are trapped in an endless cycle of reaction, from arguments on social media, personal conflicts to office power plays, most of us lose control simply because we cannot endure silence, cannot tolerate ambiguity, and fear being left behind. But it is precisely within deliberate stillness, in the ability to not react immediately, that you step into a realm of control few have ever reached. When you master yourself, you begin to influence how others perceive you. Silence forces others to fill the void with their imagination, and imagination always magnifies the value of what is unpredictable and difficult to access. In negotiation, the ability to wait becomes a weapon that causes your opponent to lose their own leverage under self-inflicted pressure. In personal relationships, your independence from immediate responses creates long-term attraction. People are always drawn to what feels scarce. In daily life, your calmness amid chaos protects you from being dragged into meaningless conflicts that drain your emotional energy. Carl Jung once stated, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." At its deepest level, this lesson is not merely about mastering others, but about mastering yourself. You learn to recognize your unconscious triggers, the fear of abandonment, the craving for acceptance, the urge to win every minor debate, and slowly dismantle the invisible chains society programmed into you since childhood. And once you master these weaknesses, you become free in the purest sense. No one can provoke you when you have no need to react. No one can manipulate you when you no longer crave control over outcomes. No one can lead you when you have become the immovable anchor amid the emotional storms around you. In that place, you no longer need to win, because you are the one who sets the rhythm of the entire game without having to fight. And this is the highest freedom, one that very few people in this world have the discipline and courage to reach.